next speaker is Amanda Reiman, PhD, School of Social Welfare at the University of California, Berkeley, right here. Amanda will tell you more about her research.
Today, I'm really excited because hot off the presses as of the with the new generation of medical cannabis patients. Today is from a program evaluation that I just completed at Berkeley Patients Group here at Berkeley. And I just want to take a minute to recognize Berkeley Patients Group, and I know that they're second, because this is amazing, okay? To going and asking organizations and healthcare services, can we come and do surveys? And they say, no, our patients aren't going to want to answer any of your questions. And Berkeley Patients Group was so welcoming and willing to be a part of this process, and it's really going to inform not only cannabis in California, but for all those other states out there that have medical cannabis done to through collectives can hopefully really benefit from this data. So what I'm going to talk about today is I have about half the data entered. We have about 350, which is the largest sample yet, of medical cannabis patients through survey data, which is wonderful. So what I'm going to talk about today is based on about half the sample. What I did, a subsample of 50 cannabis patients and compared them against a sample of 107 31 to 68-year-old medical cannabis patients to see how these populations were the same and different. So first I'll talk a little bit about how they are the same. Well, one thing that you see in both populations of Berkeley is a high number of multiracial individuals. 20% among the youth sample and 15% among the adult sample are a member of more than one ethnicity. Another thing we see that's actually good news and might also be is that most in both groups also have health insurance. Now this includes Medi-Cal and Medicare. 74% of the youth sample and 73%. Now another thing to consider is that because this is in Berkeley, which is a college town, there are a lot of students that get health insurance through the university. Another thing that we find, not too surprisingly, is that both groups find cannabis very effective in treating their symptoms. 88% of the adults claim experience less wanted side effects with cannabis than with other treatments, 82% of the youth and 79% of the adults. We also test cannabis, whether they be a pipe or a water pipe, and both groups prefer joints. 34% of the youth and 31% of the adults said that joints were their preferred method of ingestion. However, youth also favored water pipes, and 36% of the youth also used. As far as how much cannabis is ingested per week, the 38% of the youth report using 3 to 5 grams per week, and 37% amount is about the same. And 68% of the youth and 68% of the adults report that their cannabis use has remained stable over the life. It hasn't gone down. And that once you start using, you just start using more and more and more and more and more. And that doesn't seem to be the case. Patients are really able to know their bodies, know their they need in order to get relief. Another interesting finding was that 46% of the youth and 41% of the adults have alcohol. And I know that there are some campaigns going on right now to try cannabis and alcohol on college campuses. And I think that the fact that almost half of the youth say that they have used cannabis as a substitute for harm reduction technique. When asked what is the reason you can than some other dispensary, the answer was the same among the adults and the youth. On a scale of 1 to 10, with a mean of 8.9, was the most important thing for both groups. And I don't think that should come as any big surprise. So in some ways, these groups are the same, and in some ways different. So both groups are mostly male, but the youth more so. 84% of the 18 to 30-year-olds are male compared to the adults. They are a white sample, but the youth more so. 74% of the youth are white, the adults. Now again, people can choose as many ethnicities as apply to them, so this just means that white was one of the ethnicities that they chose. Both groups drink alcohol, but only about half the adults are current drinkers, whereas 60% of the youth are current drinkers. Only 14% of the adults use tobacco, and 32% of the youth use tobacco. Now, one thing that's very interesting, and I think speaks a lot to what Mitch was just talking about concerning the use of prescription drugs, never used cannabis as a substitute for a prescription drug. Now, 60% of the adults said, yeah, a substitute for a prescription drug. 18 to 30 said that they had used cannabis as a substitute for a prescription drug. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So they have a lot of similar, very distinct. Youth visit the dispensary more often, once or twice a month, which is most often found in the adult group. About 67% of the adults say that they need some kind of additional treatment or condition, and only about half of the youth say this. The youth also use cannabis slightly fewer times per day, 2 versus 2 to 3 for the adults, but they also tend to use more cannabis in the week, with more youth reporting that they use as opposed to 3 to 5. Now, some of the differences in the data are definitely so things like the youth were more likely to be employed part-time, whereas adults were more likely to be employed, likely to have some college, because a lot of them are still students, whereas the adults, 34% of the adult sample has a college degree. The youth income tended to be lower, and the youth tended to be single, more likely than adults. So both through this data and talking to the youth, talking to the younger medical cannabis patients, are just a couple things. Youth are using medical cannabis for are more likely to be things like insomnia, depression, anxiety, less chronic pain, injury reports than with the adults. But I think that makes a really important point. And this point came out during some conversations I had with young cannabis patients. Medical cannabis is often a first line of defense for their condition, rather than a last resort that they feel has maybe been marketed towards the older generation for the pharmaceutical industry. And they know the risks of psychotropic medications for young adults, like suicide. They know medicine, and they don't see it as a recreational drug. To the patients that I talked to, getting high was not why they were getting a card. It was about getting access to safe, or what was doing them far greater good than Prozac, than Xanax, than Valium. So I want to leave, as Mitch said, if your child was dealing with anxiety issues and had the choice to use Xanax or to use organic herbal cannabis, which would you choose for them? So thank you.